What exactly is Backtrack? Well, if that's your question, you've come to the right place. Let's begin. Our objective for you and I in this nugget is simple, is to identify what exactly is Backtrack. Now, to do that, let's imagine that you and I work at a company, we've been there for several years, and the manager comes up to us and says, "Are we protected?" Now, hopefully, our answer to him or her would be absolutely yes. And we could explain that part of the process of making sure that our network is solid and protected is to, first of all, identify vulnerabilities and weaknesses that are present in most networks. Now, not just our network, but most networks. Secondly, once we identify what those weaknesses and vulnerabilities are and what the risk is if we leave those unprotected, what countermeasures can we put in place? Things like intrusion prevention systems and firewalls and other techniques to help mitigate or lessen the effectiveness of an attack. And then third, once we have those countermeasures in place, we definitely want to validate that those countermeasures are working. And to do that, we want to go ahead and use, with authorization in writing from the people who own the network, we want to use some penetration testing tools to discover and verify that our mitigation techniques are working. See, the reality is this. If we have an unprotected network, we're very likely going to be compromised. If we have a really protected network, but we don't test it, it's also very likely that we could be compromised. So our objective is, where do we go to get a whole bunch of tools that can assist us in testing and using a lot of the same tools an attacker would use? And one of the answers to the question, where do we get all the tools to do the testing, is a distribution of Linux, and they call it Backtrack. What Backtrack is, it's a flavor of Linux that's running. You can either run it several different ways. You can actually run it off of a CD. They call it live CD. It's really a DVD because it's more than 3 gigs. With live CD, you simply burn the image to a DVD. You put it inside of a computer. You boot up the computer. You hit the right key so it boots off of the DVD drive as opposed to the hard drive. And then poof, you've got this Backtrack Linux distribution that has hundreds, literally hundreds of tools built inside of it. You can also do that same technique off of a USB. So the key is here that if you walked into an office and you had a USB drive and you plugged it in, if you're authorized to do so, if you plugged it in, you could boot that machine off of that USB drive and have your attack machine right there. And so all a person, an attacker, might have to do is walk in with either a CD or a USB and find a machine that's physically available, plug it in, and without any safeguards in place, they could run Backtrack on that computer in that office. Another option is to install Backtrack, the distribution, to the hard disk. So you can either take the entire hard disk or you can partition the hard disk. Now we don't have to worry about having a specific CD or a specific USB drive to go ahead and boot from. You can simply boot from the actual hard drive on your own laptop. And it's really a penetration testing tool, a digital forensics tool kit, and that toolkit contains a boatload, hundreds, literally hundreds of tools that we can use for all of these purposes. And in our CBT Nugget series together on Backtrack, we'll be covering a lot of these tools. In this nugget, we've identified that Backtrack is a Linux distribution that has tons of attack and penetration testing tools built into it. It can be installed directly on the hard drive, or we can run it from the DVD directly or from a flash drive. I'd also like to point out that we would never, ever want to use any type of tool against any network that we aren't explicitly authorized to do that penetration testing or reconnaissance work against. I'm glad you've joined me. I hope this information has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.